The Council desired a galaxy without humans. Now, they're desperate to reverse it. Part 1. The Vote. The Great Chamber of the Galactic Council sat at the heart of Pinnacle Station, a massive ring of metal and light that floated between 3 dead stars. 12 species had built it together thousands of years ago, back when they believed cooperation was the highest form of power. Now, on this day, they were about to use that cooperation to destroy something. Ambassador Thylon Vor stood at the central platform. He was tall, even by Silaquan standards, and his crystalline skin caught the light of the chamber and threw it back in cold, sharp patterns. He had waited 11 years for this moment. He had written the speeches. He had made the deals in dark hallways. He had whispered fears into the ears of every counselor who would listen. And now, finally, the vote was here. Fellow members of the Unified Concord, he began, his voice smooth and practiced. I do not come before you today to speak of war. Humans have not attacked us. They have not broken our laws in any way that we can point to and say, there, that is the crime. And that is precisely the problem. He paused and let the silence do its work. Humans do not conquer. They do not need to. They arrive on a world and within 1 generation, they have married into the local population, started businesses, learned the language, changed the food, built schools that teach their ideas alongside ours. And before anyone notices, the world does not feel like it belongs to its original people anymore. It feels like it belongs to everyone. And in practice, that means it belongs to them. Across the chamber, General Idris Achebe sat in the human section and listened. He was 63 years old. His hair was gray and cut short against his dark skin. He had fought in 2 border conflicts, negotiated 9 treaties, and spent the last 30 years of his life trying to earn humanity a permanent seat on this council. He had never gotten it. Humans were always observers, always guests, never family. He watched Thylon Vor speak and felt something heavy settle in his chest. He had seen this coming for years. The way conversations would stop when he entered a room. The way trade agreements would stall for no reason. The way other species looked at human colonies, not with anger, but with something worse. Fear. The quiet kind. Thylon Vor continued. He showed projections. In 600 years, humans had spread from 1 small planet to over 400 worlds. They had gone from a species that could barely reach their own moon to a civilization that touched every corner of the galaxy. No other species had ever expanded this fast. Not even close. They are not like us, Thylon Vor said. We grow slowly. We consider. We plan for 10,000 years. Humans plan for next Tuesday. And somehow, that works for them. But it does not work for us. Their chaos infects everything it touches. Their speed makes our stability look like weakness. Their creativity makes our traditions feel like chains. They do not mean to do this. I believe that. But the result is the same. When it was time for the human delegation to speak, General Achebe stood slowly. The chamber was quiet. Every eye, every sensor, every crystal and membrane and receptor was focused on him. He did not bring projections. He did not bring data. He brought only his voice and his years. I'd have spent my life in this chamber, he said, not as a member, but as a guest. Always as a guest. I have watched my people build bridges between species who would not speak to each other. I have watched human doctors develop cures for diseases that affected species we had never even met. I have watched human artists create works that made a Corvani warrior weep and a Thessari hive mind pause in wonder. He looked directly at Thylon Vor. You say we are chaos. Maybe you are right. But chaos is not the opposite of order. It is the thing that keeps order alive. A garden that is too perfect does not grow. It just sits there, looking beautiful, until the soil dies. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was lower, almost gentle. If you remove us, you will not notice the damage at first. The galaxy will feel cleaner, quieter, more organized. And then, slowly, things will start to break. Not because we are so important, but because we are connected to everything. You cannot pull a thread from a cloth and expect the cloth to hold. The silence in the chamber was enormous. Arbiter Kessa Morath, the presiding judge, called the vote. She was Drelith, a tall insectoid creature with 4 arms and eyes that had seen 3 centuries of galactic politics. Her voice was flat and official, but her hands trembled slightly as she read the motion. The motion before the Council is the Human Expulsion Act. All human populations are to withdraw from non-origin systems within 1 galactic year. Trade licenses will be revoked. Embassies will be closed. Human cultural and commercial presence in Council space will be formally ended. The votes came in one by one. Yes, 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 yes. Councillor Yinri, the small bioluminescent Pelori, who represented the youngest species on the Council, voted no. Her light flickered with distress as she cast it, and several councillors looked at her with pity, as if she simply did not understand. The final count was 11-1. General Achebe stood, buttoned his uniform jacket, and walked toward the exit. No one stopped him. No one spoke to him. He moved through the corridors of Pinnacle Station alone, his boots echoing on the metal floor. And when he reached the human docking bay, he stopped and looked back one last time at the station that had been his second home for 30 years. Then he boarded his ship and sent a single transmission to Earth. The message was short. They have made their choice. Bring everyone home. Across the galaxy, on 400 worlds, the word spread. Humans began to pack. They closed their shops, sold their homes, said goodbye to neighbors who would not meet their eyes. Some of those neighbors stood in doorways and watched the humans leave and felt something they could not name. It was not happiness. It was not relief. It was the feeling of watching something important end, and knowing, in some deep and honest place, that you had made a terrible mistake. Back on Pinnacle Station, Councillor Yinri stood at a viewing window and watched the last human ships pull away. Their lights grew smaller and smaller, until they were just dots, and then they were nothing at all. Her aide stood beside her and asked if she was all right. Yinri did not look away from the dark. Count the days, she said quietly. They will not be enough. The Council desired a galaxy without humans. Now they're desperate to reverse it. Part 2, The Silence. 5 years after the humans left, the first trade route collapsed. It was a small one, the Bravathi grain shipments between the outer colonies and the Corvani border worlds. Nobody paid much attention at first. Grain shipments were boring. They were the kind of thing that just happened in the background, like air or gravity. But when the shipments stopped, 12 colonies ran out of food within 3 months. Trade Minister Osir Kaloon sat in his office on Bravath Prime and stared at the numbers on his screen. He was a reptilian creature with green-gold scales and small, clever eyes that had spent 40 years reading profit margins. He was very good at reading profit margins. What he was not good at was understanding why everything was falling apart. The problem was not simple. It was never simple. When the humans left, they took their shipping software with them. Not out of spite. It was their property, built by human engineers, running on human code, maintained by human technicians. When the Expulsion Act passed, the humans had simply turned it off. Legally, they had every right to do so. Kaloon had assumed his people could replace it. The Bravathi were merchants. They had been trading across the stars for 10,000 years before humans even existed. How hard could it be? Very hard, it turned out. The human shipping system was not just software. It was a living network of relationships, favors, informal agreements, and trust built over centuries. A human trader on one side of the galaxy could call a human trader on the other side and get a cargo hold rerouted in an hour based on nothing but a handshake made 20 years ago. The Bravathi did not work that way. Nobody worked that way except humans. 3 more trade routes collapsed in the second year. By the third year, 27 colonies were experiencing shortages of basic supplies. On the terraformed world of Vela's Garden, Dr. Halem floated through a dying forest and tried to understand what had gone wrong. Halem was Thesari, a gaseous being that existed as a shared consciousness spread across thousands of tiny particles. The Thesari were considered the finest scientists in the galaxy. They were precise. They were elegant. They were brilliant. They could not figure out why the trees were dying. Human terraformers had built this world 80 years ago. They had used a technique they called biome weaving, which the Thesari had always considered messy and unscientific. Instead of designing a perfect controlled ecosystem, humans had thrown dozens of species together and let them fight it out. They introduced predators too early, planted competing crops side by side, and allowed what they cheerfully called creative chaos to determine which organisms survived. The result was an ecosystem that looked disorganized, but was incredibly strong. When a disease killed one crop, 3 others were already growing in its place. When a predator population exploded, its food supply adjusted within a single season. The whole system bent and flexed and recovered from anything the galaxy threw at it. When the human maintenance crews left, the Thesari sent their own scientists to take over. They looked at the messy, overlapping, redundant systems the humans had built and immediately began to clean them up. They removed the redundancies. They organized the biomes into proper categories. They made it elegant. Within 2 years, the elegant system began to die. It could not adapt. It was beautiful and fragile, like a crystal sculpture in an earthquake. Halem floated through the brown, crumbling forest and transmitted a report to the council. The report said, in the careful and precise language of the Thesari, that they had made a mistake. The human approach had not been messy. It had been a different kind of genius that the Thesari simply did not have the instincts to replicate. But the trade failures and the dying worlds were not what kept the council awake at night. What kept them awake was the silence. Warden Salith stood on the observation deck of Border Station 9 and stared into the black. She was Corvani, a tall and powerful creature covered in silver-gray fur, with eyes that could see in spectrums most species could not even name. She had been assigned to patrol the border of human space 3 years ago, and in all that time, she had detected nothing. Nothing at all. No signals, no ships, no trade beacons, no emergency transmissions, no refugees, no communication of any kind. 900 billion humans across hundreds of worlds had simply gone quiet. The region of space they had withdrawn into was now called the Quiet, and it was the most frightening place in the galaxy. Salith sent reports to the council every week. The reports always said the same thing. Silence. Complete and total silence. She had requested permission to send a probe into human space. The request was denied. She had requested permission to attempt communication. Denied. She had requested permission to cross the border herself with a small scout ship. Denied. The council was afraid, not of what they might find. They were afraid of what the silence meant. A species does not go quiet unless it is dead or unless it is building something. Salith's sensors picked up energy signatures deep inside the Quiet, massive ones. The kind of energy that suggested construction on a scale she had never seen before. She included this in her reports. The council read the reports and did nothing. Meanwhile, Counselor Yinri worked alone. She spent her nights sending messages to every contact she had in human space. None of them were answered. She proposed reopening diplomatic channels at 3 separate council sessions. Each time, Thailand Vor blocked her. He stood at the same platform where he had delivered his great speech and said that the adjustment period was natural, that the galaxy would stabilize, that they simply needed patience. His voice was less steady than it had been 5 years ago. His crystalline skin had lost some of its shine. On a small Bravathi colony world at the edge of the quiet, a communication officer was eating his evening meal when his console lit up. He choked on his food and ran to the screen. It was a transmission from human space, the first one in 5 years. It was not a message. It was a data packet. When he decoded it, he found a shipping manifest. It listed every good and service that humans had once provided to his colony. Food supplements, medical supplies, entertainment feeds, educational materials, engineering support, cultural exchange programs. Next to each item was its annual value in galactic credits. At the bottom of the manifest, there was a single line of text. It read, "You are welcome to continue without us." The communication officer stared at the screen for a long time. Then he forwarded the manifest to his government. Within a day, it had reached the council. Within a week, every species in the galaxy had seen it. It was not a threat. It was not an insult. It was something much worse. It was a reminder, a quiet, polite, devastating reminder of exactly what the galaxy had thrown away. Thailand Vor read it in his private chambers and said nothing. He turned off his screen and sat in the dark. Somewhere, deep inside the quiet, humanity continued to be silent. And the galaxy, for the first time in its long history, was afraid of the sound of nothing at all. The Council desired a galaxy without humans. Now they're desperate to reverse it. Part 3. The Collapse. 12 years after the expulsion, a Corvani warship fired on a Draelith cargo vessel in the Ashenmere Nebula. And the galaxy finally understood how much trouble it was in. The dispute was over mining rights. Both species claimed the nebula. Both species had documents that proved their claim. Both species had been arguing about it for over a century. And for 40 of those years, a human diplomat named Sarah Chen had kept them talking instead of shooting. She had organized dinners. She had arranged cultural exchanges. She had once locked a Corvani general and a Draelith hive mother in a room with a bottle of Terran whiskey, and refused to open the door until they shook hands. It had worked. Sarah Chen had been dead for 6 years now, old age taking her on some quiet human world inside the quiet. Not because there were no diplomats left in the galaxy. There were thousands, but none of them had that strange human gift for making enemies sit down and realize they were being ridiculous. The Corvani Draelith incident did not start a war. Not quite, but it came close, and the closeness of it sent a shockwave through every government in Council space. For the first time, species that had lived in peace for thousands of years began to look at their neighbors and wonder. This was just one crack. There were hundreds of others. On the entertainment networks, the same shows played on repeat, the same music, the same stories. The Siloquan produced beautiful crystalline operas that lasted for days, and they were technically perfect and emotionally empty. The Pelori created bioluminescent art that shimmered in the deep oceans, and it was lovely, and it said nothing new. Every species had retreated into its own traditions, and without humans to challenge them, to mix things up, to walk into a room and say something stupid that turned out to be brilliant, the entire cultural life of the galaxy had gone stale. Nobody talked about it openly, but everyone felt it. A heaviness, a grayness, the feeling of living in a house where all the windows had been shut. And then came the plague. The Valith rot appeared first on a Bravathi mining colony. It was a fungal infection that attacked the respiratory systems of oxygen-breathing species. It spread fast, mutated faster, and within 6 months it had reached 3 systems. The Thesari, the galaxy's best scientists, threw everything they had at it. They analyzed its genetic structure, they mapped its mutation patterns. They designed 17 different treatments, each one more elegant and precise than the last. The rot kept mutating, kept changing, kept finding new ways around every solution the Thessari created. A young Silicon engineer named Cavil Reese watched the crisis unfold from his workshop on Siliqua Prime. He was 24 years old and had never met a human in his life. But he had spent the last 3 years studying human engineering archives, the ones that had been left behind in public databases when the humans withdrew. Most Silicon engineers considered these archives a curiosity at best and a mess at worst. Cavil saw something different. He noticed that humans built things in a way that made no sense to Silicon thinking. They added extra parts that seemed to serve no purpose. They connected systems that had no logical reason to be connected. They overbuilt some components and underbuilt others in patterns that looked random but were not. Cavil spent 6 months studying a human water filtration system that had been installed on a colony world. The Siloquan version of the same system used 47 parts and worked perfectly under normal conditions. The human version used 112 parts, looked like it had been designed by a committee of drunk engineers, and worked under every condition, including conditions that should have been impossible. The humans had not been building for perfection. They had been building for survival. Every extra part, every strange connection, every seemingly pointless redundancy was there to catch the system when something unexpected happened. And something unexpected always happened. Humans knew this. They planned for chaos not by trying to prevent it, but by making sure that when it came, there were 10 different backup plans ready to go. Cavil wrote a paper about this. He called it The Architecture of Imperfection. It was ignored by every major Silicon institution. It was downloaded 4 million times by everyone else. In the ports and stations of the outer colonies, a strange new culture was growing. They called themselves the Hollow Fleet. They were pirates and outcasts and misfits from a dozen different species, and they had adopted human ways. They wore human clothing. They played human music from cracked and ancient data drives. They greeted each other with human handshakes and told human jokes that they did not fully understand, but laughed at anyway. Their captain was a Draelith who called herself Jackie. She had 4 arms, compound eyes, and a leather jacket that she had found in an abandoned human shop on a border world. She wore it everywhere. When asked why she and her crew pretended to be human, she said they were not pretending. They were remembering. The Hollow Fleet was mocked in the official media. They were called fools, traitors, and worse. But, in private, their music was the most downloaded content in the galaxy. Their style was copied on 100 worlds. They represented something that no one wanted to admit out loud. The galaxy missed humans. It missed the noise. It missed the chaos. It missed the life. On Pinnacle Station, the Council was falling apart. Trade was broken. Diplomacy was failing. The plague was spreading. And the architect of all this misery, Ambassador Thylan Vor, stood at the central platform and proposed the one thing he had sworn he would never do. "I propose," he said, and his voice cracked on the word, "that we send a delegation into human space to negotiate, to discuss the possibility of limited re-engagement." He called it a position of strength. He said the Council was offering humans a chance to participate in galactic affairs again, on the Council's terms. Nobody in the chamber believed him. They could see the truth, in the way his crystalline skin had gone dull, in the way his hands gripped the podium, in the way his eyes would not stay still. Arbiter Kessa Marath, who had been silent for 12 years, who had cast her vote and carried the guilt of it every single day since, finally spoke. She stood at her place above the chamber and looked down at the assembled counselors, and her voice was heavy with a weariness that 3 centuries of life had earned. "We told ourselves we were pruning a garden," she said, We told ourselves the garden would be better, cleaner, more orderly. We did not understand that they were not the weeds. She paused. They were the soil. The vote to send a delegation was unanimous. Counselor Yinri was chosen to lead it. There was no victory in being right when being right meant watching everything she loved crumble for 12 years. Her ship crossed the border into the quiet on a cold morning, Galactic Standard Time. The moment they passed the boundary, every instrument on the ship went dark. Navigation, communication, sensors, everything. The crew panicked. Yinri did not. She sat in her chair and waited. After 17 minutes of absolute darkness, a single light appeared ahead of them. A navigation beacon, human-made. It blinked once, twice, 3 times, and then held steady, pointing them forward. Then another appeared, and another. A trail of lights in the darkness, leading them deeper into the silence. Yinri looked at her crew. "Follow them," she said. And they did, flying into the quiet, toward whatever humanity had become in the 12 years since the galaxy had thrown them away. The Council desired a galaxy without humans. Now they're desperate to reverse it. Part 4. The Quiet. The navigation beacons led them through 3 star systems before Counselor Yinri saw her first human world. And when she did, she pressed her small glowing hands against the viewport and did not speak for a very long time. The planet was green. Not the pale, controlled green of a Thessary-designed world, but a wild, uneven, living green that spread across continents in patches and bursts and tangles. Cities sat between forests. Rivers cut through farmland that grew right up to the edges of towns. Ships moved in steady streams between the surface and a ring of orbital stations, and every single one of them was broadcasting music. Different music. All at once. It should have been noise. Somehow, it was not. Her pilot, a nervous brevethy named Tosk, checked his instruments. They were working again. The humans had turned them back on. He scanned the system, and his scales went pale. "Counselor," he said, "there are over 200 million people on that world. The infrastructure readings are... I do not have a comparison. This was a dead rock 12 years ago." Yinri said nothing. She watched a human cargo ship pass beneath them, close enough to read the name painted on its side in bright red letters. Second Chance. The beacons led them to Hearthstone Station, and Hearthstone Station was not what any of them expected. The Council had imagined a fortress, a military stronghold, a place built for defense, for war, for the confrontation that they had been dreading for 12 years. Instead, Hearthstone was a city in space. It was enormous and messy and loud and alive. Docking bays sat next to schools. Hospitals shared walls with theaters. A market stretched across an entire deck, and even from the outside, Yinri could see the movement of thousands of people going about their lives. Children ran in corridors that had been painted with murals. Old people sat in gardens that grew under artificial sunlight. Somewhere, someone was cooking something that made the entire docking level smell like spices and warmth. A human woman met them at the airlock. She was tall, with dark brown skin and black hair pulled back tight, and she wore a simple gray uniform with no medals or decorations. Her eyes were calm and sharp, and when she smiled, it was polite but did not reach those eyes. "Counselor Yinri," she said, "I am Director Marin Achebe. Welcome to Hearthstone. Please, come with me." Yinri recognized the name, Achebe, the granddaughter of General Idris Achebe, the man who had walked out of the council chamber 18 years ago, the man who had brought his people home. He had died 7 years ago, Yinri would later learn. Peacefully, in his sleep, in a house he had built with his own hands, on a world the council did not know existed. Marin led them through the station. She showed them everything. She hid nothing. And that, Yinri realized, was the point. The humans were not afraid of being seen. They had nothing to be ashamed of. She showed them the schools, where human children learned science, and art, and music, and the histories of alien species who had voted to throw their grandparents out of the galaxy. The children learned these histories without anger. They learned them the way you learn about a storm that happened before you were born. It was something that had happened. It was not something that defined them. She showed them the hospitals, where human doctors had developed medical techniques that the delegation's own scientists could not fully understand. She showed them a research lab, where a team of 11 people was working on a cure for the Valith rot. They had found it 6 months ago. It sat in a sealed container on a shelf, labeled and ready for production. Yinri stared at the container. "You have the cure," she said. "Yes," said Marin, "and you did not send it." Marin looked at her steadily. "We were not asked. We were told to leave. We were not told we still had obligations to the people who told us to leave." She said it without cruelty. That was the worst part. There was no bitterness in her voice, no satisfaction, just a simple statement of fact that cut deeper than any weapon. Marin explained what had happened during the quiet. When General Ashabi had brought the order home, humanity had grieved. For 1 full year, they had simply grieved. People cried in the streets. Families that had lived on alien worlds for generations packed everything they owned into ships and flew to a home they had never seen. It was the largest migration in human history, and it was done in silence. And then, when the grief was finished, they got to work. They called it the inward turn. Every resource, every mind, every ounce of human energy and stubbornness and creativity was poured into one single project, building a civilization that would never need the Council again. New trade networks, human to human, new terraformed worlds, designed with the messy, resilient, beautiful chaos that only humans understood. New medicine, new art, new music, new ways of living that were entirely, completely, defiantly their own. Marin took them to a viewing deck and showed them a map. It was called the Lattice, and it was a web of human worlds stretching across hundreds of star systems, all connected, all sharing, all alive. It pulsed with light and movement, and it was the most impressive thing Yinri had ever seen. "You built this in 12 years, Yinri whispered. "We build fast," Marin said. "You may recall that was one of the complaints." Yinri spent 3 days on Hearthstone. She ate human food, she listened to human music, she watched human children play a game that involved kicking a ball and screaming with joy, and she felt something break inside her chest that she did not know how to fix. On the 3rd day, she sat across from Marin HFY in a small room with a window that looked out at the stars, and asked the question she had been sent to ask. "Will you come back?" Marin did not answer right away. She poured 2 cups of tea, a human drink that Yinri found bitter and strangely comforting, and she sat for a while in silence. "You did not remove us because we were dangerous," Marin said at last. "You removed us because we made you uncomfortable, because we were loud and fast and messy, and we did not look like what you thought a civilization should look like. You wanted a tidy galaxy." She took a sip of her tea. "How is that working?" Yinri could not answer. Her glow dimmed until she was almost dark. "We will consider it," Marin said. "But you should understand something. We are not the same people you sent away. We have grown. We have built something here that we are proud of. And there are many among us, especially the young ones, who are asking a question that your council will not enjoy hearing." "What question?" Yinri asked. Marin set down her cup. "Why would we go back?" The delegation returned to council space carrying a document. It was not a request. It was not a plea. It was an offer, written in clear, simple language, with terms that were not negotiable. Humanity would re-engage with the galactic community, but only as full equals. A permanent seat on the council. The 13th seat. Full voting rights. including veto power, and reparations, not in credits or resources, but in words. A formal, public, galactic admission that the Human Expulsion Act had been wrong. Thailand Vor read the document in the council chamber. His crystalline hands shook so badly that he had to set it down twice. He looked up at the other counselors, at their faces and sensors and membranes, and he saw the same thing in all of them. They would accept. They had no choice, and everyone in the room knew it. The council desired a galaxy without humans. Now, they're desperate to reverse it. Part 5. The Return. The debate lasted 4 months. It should not have taken that long. Everyone knew how it would end. But pride is a slow thing to kill, especially in species that have been alive for thousands of years. And so the counselors argued and debated and delayed and argued again, because admitting you were wrong is the hardest thing any civilization can do. Thailand Vor fought it. Of course he did. He stood at the central platform, where he had once delivered the speech that changed the galaxy, and he argued that the terms were too harsh, that humanity was demanding too much, that a permanent seat with veto power would change the balance of the council forever. He said all of these things, and they were all technically true, and none of them mattered. Late one evening, after a particularly brutal session, Arbiter Kessa Morath found him sitting alone in an empty corridor. His crystalline skin was almost gray. He looked old in a way that Silaquans were not supposed to look old. She sat beside him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "You knew this would happen," she said finally. It was not a question. Vor was quiet for so long that she thought he would not answer. Then he said something that surprised her. "I thought it would make us stronger. I thought that if we removed them, we would be forced to become like them, to adapt, to create, to fill the space they left behind with our own brilliance." He looked at his hands. "Instead, we just shrank." "Then why did you do it?" "Because they frightened me. Not what they were, but what they showed us about ourselves. Every time a human solved a problem faster than us, or built something more resilient, or connected two ideas that none of us had thought to connect, it was a mirror. And the reflection was not kind." He paused. "I did not hate humans. I hated what I saw when I stood next to them." Kessa Morath considered this. She had lived 300 years and had learned that most great mistakes are made by people who are more afraid of themselves than of anything else. "Then let them back in," she said, "and this time, try looking in the mirror without flinching." The vote was held on a morning that meant nothing special to anyone. There was no ceremony, no grand speeches, just 12 counselors pressing their voting lights, one by one, and watching the result appear on the central display. Unanimous. For the first time in 18 years, the council agreed on something about humans. They agreed that they needed them back. The acceptance ceremony was broadcast across every system in the galaxy. Trillions of beings watched on screens and projections and neural feeds as Counselor Yinri stepped to the platform to read the formal acknowledgement. She was small, even for a Pelori, and her bioluminescent skin glowed with a soft blue light that flickered with each breath. She had written the words herself. She had spent weeks on them. She had rewritten them 11 times, and when she finally spoke them, her voice was steady but thin, like a thread holding something very heavy. The Unified Concord recognizes that the Human Expulsion Act was an act of fear disguised as governance. We looked at a species that was loud and fast and messy and alive, and we decided that these qualities were threats rather than gifts. We removed from our galaxy not a problem, but a partner. We called it wisdom. It was cowardice. The chamber was perfectly silent. We were wrong. We say this not because humanity demands it, but because it is true. and we say it publicly because the harm was done publicly, and healing must begin in the same light. On Hearthstone Station, director Marin Achebe watched the broadcast with her senior staff. Nobody cheered, nobody celebrated. A few people cried quietly. Most just sat and listened, and felt the weight of 18 years shift slightly, not disappearing, but settling into something that could be carried. Marin turned off the screen and said, "Pack a bag. We leave tomorrow." She arrived at Pinnacle Station with a small delegation. No fleet, no display of power, just 23 people on a single ship, carrying nothing but documents and luggage, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are. The 13th seat had been installed in the council chamber. It was built from the same metal as the other 12. But the humans had sent a small request. They wanted the seat's backing to be made from wood, real wood, from a tree that had grown on Earth. The council had agreed, not understanding why it mattered. Humans did things like that. They always had. Marin Achebe sat down in the 13th seat and looked around the chamber. 12 species looked back at her. Some with shame, some with relief, some with something that might, in time, become respect. Her first act as a full council member was not a demand. It was not a declaration of power, or a reminder of what the galaxy had done to her people. She placed a proposal on the table for a joint medical initiative to distribute the Valith rot cure to every affected system, free of charge, using the formula humanity had developed during the Quiet as a foundation. This is what we have always done. Across the galaxy, things began to change. Not quickly, not easily. 18 years of damage could not be fixed in a day. But the changes were real, and they were everywhere. The Hollow Fleet, those mixed-species outcasts who had kept human culture alive in the dark years, were officially pardoned. Their captain, the four-armed Draelith who called herself Jackie, was offered a position as a cultural liaison between human and Draelith communities. When she received the offer, she was standing on the bridge of her battered old ship, wearing her leather jacket, and she read it 3 times before she believed it. Then she sat down on the floor and wept while her crew pretended not to notice. Cavil Reese, the young Silaquan engineer who had written the paper nobody wanted to read, was assigned to a joint human Silaquan engineering project on a new space station. On his first day, he walked into the workshop and found it already full of noise and mess and half-finished projects scattered across every surface. A human engineer about his own age walked up to him, pressed a warm cup of dark liquid into his hands, and said, "You are going to love this. It tastes terrible, and it fixes everything." Cavil looked at the cup. He looked at the workshop. He looked at the human, who was grinning at him with the kind of easy warmth that no Silaquan had ever directed at a stranger. "What is it?" he asked. "Coffee," said the human. "Trust me." Cavil drank it. It was, indeed, terrible. He drank 3 more cups that day. Warden Salith, who had spent 12 years staring into the quiet from her border station, was reassigned to a joint patrol with human ships. The first human she met in person was a short, soft-spoken man named David, who laughed at things that were not funny, and apologized to doors when he bumped into them. Salith towered over him by a full meter, and could have broken him in half with one hand. "I expected something more frightening," she told him. David looked up at her, a Corvani warrior with silver fur and predator's eyes and teeth that could crack metal, and he grinned. "Give it time," he said. She did not understand what he meant. In the weeks that followed, as she watched him talk a hostile smuggler into surrendering without a single shot, negotiate a trade dispute between 3 species in under an hour, and somehow make the entire crew of a Corvani warship laugh at a story about a chicken, she began to understand. Humans were not frightening because they were strong. They were frightening because they were everything, all at once, and they did not even realize how remarkable that was. On the last evening of her first week on the council, Marin Achabi stood at the same viewing window where Councillor Yinri had stood 18 years ago, and watched the human ships depart into the dark. But this time, the ships were arriving. Human freighters carrying medical supplies, human engineers heading to failing terraformed worlds, human diplomats spreading out to old posts and new ones, human musicians and artists and teachers and cooks and builders and dreamers, all of them pouring back into a galaxy that had thrown them away and was now, quietly and with great shame, holding the door open. Yinri joined her at the window. The two of them stood side by side, the small glowing Pelori and the tall human woman, and watched the lights of incoming ships fill the dark like new stars being born. "Your grandfather would be proud," Yinri said. Marin thought about that. She thought about the old man who had walked out of this station with his back straight and his heart broken. She thought about the message he had sent home. She thought about the years of silence, and the years of building, and the years of becoming something new. "He would say there is work to do," she said. The next morning, the council convened with 13 seats filled for the first time in its history. The chamber hummed with the sounds of 12 ancient species and one young one, all talking at once, arguing, disagreeing, laughing, and trying, imperfectly and messily and beautifully, to figure out the future together. Marin Achebe activated her speaking light. The chamber quieted. 12 species turned to look at the 13th, the one they had tried to erase, the one that had refused to be erased, the one that had come back not with anger, but with coffee and medicine and music and open hands. She looked around the room at all of them, and she smiled. "So," she said, "where were we?"